Imagine a kidnapping. Normally, we think of terrified victims who, over time, may form bonds with their captors. That's the famous Stockholm Syndrome. But what if it were the other way around? What if the kidnappers were the ones who ended up developing affection and empathy for their victims? This phenomenon exists, and it has a name: Lima Syndrome. A rare but intriguing psychological condition that reveals how unpredictable the human mind can be, even in situations of violence and power. The term emerged in 1996 after a mass kidnapping in Lima, Peru. During an event at the Japanese embassy, more than 400 people were taken hostage by an armed group known as the Túpac Amaru revolutionary movement. At first, it seemed like just another act of terrorism. The rebels demanded the release of political prisoners and wanted to draw the world's attention to their cause. But something unexpected began to happen. As the days passed, the kidnappers started showing empathy toward their victims. Instead of cruelty, there were conversations. Instead of threats, there were gestures of care. Little by little, hostages began to be released, with no apparent explanation. Many of those hostages were not strategic targets, yet the kidnappers still held power over them. So why release them? The answer lay in the psychological transformation taking place within the kidnappers themselves. This behavior puzzled specialists. Lima Syndrome was born as a concept to describe exactly this, when the kidnapper, instead of dehumanizing the victim, begins to see them as someone they can identify with. But what leads to this attachment? Some psychologists believe that prolonged interaction creates a kind of emotional mirror. The aggressor begins to see the humanity they were supposed to deny. Other scholars point to the possibility of an internal moral conflict. Many kidnappers are not irrational monsters, but people who, when confronted with the real suffering of a victim, feel guilt and compassion. There's also the matter of identity. The kidnapper, in getting closer to the victim, may discover common ground, a similar background, shared beliefs, or even life stories that resonate within them. But this unexpected empathy does not necessarily mean kindness. In many cases, it's a strategic weakness because it undermines the original intention of the kidnapping. At the Japanese embassy in Lima, this became clear. Many hostages were released before the final military raid. The kidnapping lost strength because the captors simply couldn't maintain their cold posture. Lima Syndrome is almost the psychological opposite of Stockholm Syndrome. While in Stockholm, the victim finds a way to survive by forming bonds. In Lima, it is the kidnapper who emotionally weakens. This phenomenon raises disturbing questions. How far does human empathy go? To what extent can even a criminal be transformed by contact with their victim? And more, does Lima Syndrome reveal something fundamental about us? Something that shows that the human mind, no matter how hardened, can still open up in the face of another's vulnerability. Cases of Lima Syndrome are not as famous as those of Stockholm, but there are records in different parts of the world. They usually involve prolonged kidnappings or hostage situations where coexistence is inevitable. Often, this bond can change the outcome of a kidnapping. Instead of extreme violence, negotiation may arise. Instead of tragedy, an unexpected solution. But Lima Syndrome can also be dangerous. For authorities, it complicates things. An emotionally involved kidnapper may act unpredictably. For victims, this apparent empathy doesn't mean safety. The affection may be unstable, and the aggressor can swing between kindness and violence within minutes. The mind of a kidnapper in Lima is a battlefield. They struggle between their initial goal and the feelings they shouldn't have. This contradiction can be as deadly as violence itself. Psychologically, Lima Syndrome reveals something fascinating: the human inability to maintain a mask for too long. Prolonged interaction eventually tears down the veil of power. The aggressor begins to see the victim not as an object anymore, but as a person. And at that moment, their own narrative of violence starts to crumble. But is this syndrome really a weakness? Some experts argue it may be an unconscious mechanism of self-preservation, a way to reduce the psychological stress of keeping someone under control. For the kidnapper, forming bonds may ease internal pressure. By turning the hostage into someone close, they lessen the weight of guilt and soften their own emotional pain. This explanation raises another question. Is Lima Syndrome genuine empathy or just a form of self-deception? Does the kidnapper care about the victim or only about themselves? In the case of Lima, Peru, many of the released hostages reported that some kidnappers truly seemed to care about them, asking about their families and offering small acts of kindness. This contradictory behavior shows how paradoxical the human mind can be. The same individual capable of taking up arms is also capable of feeling compassion. This duality is disturbing because it destroys the idea of the absolute villain. It forces us to see that even aggressors carry inner conflicts that challenge the logic of violence. And maybe that's why Lima Syndrome is so intriguing. It shows that evil is rarely pure. Often, it's a game of internal forces, a constant struggle between brutality and humanity. But don't be mistaken. Despite showing traces of empathy, Lima Syndrome does not make the kidnapper innocent. The damage to victims remains real and devastating. For victims, it can be confusing to interpret this sudden kindness. After all, how do you respond to someone who keeps you captive, but at the same time treats you with care? This contradiction can even create a dangerous dynamic, where victim and aggressor become trapped in an ambiguous relationship full of emotional nuances. From a clinical perspective, Lima Syndrome is still not an official diagnosis. It's more of a descriptive concept, used to explain behaviors observed in extreme situations. But even without formal status, this phenomenon continues to be studied because it helps reveal how the gray areas of the human mind work. After all, it is in extreme situations that we discover the darkest paradoxes of human behavior. And kidnapping, with its mix of power, fear, and coexistence, is one of those extreme laboratories. Lima Syndrome is not just a psychological curiosity. It is a disturbing mirror of how contradictory humans can be, even in moments of greatest brutality. In the end, the case in Lima, Peru, not only gave this rare syndrome its name, but also left us a lesson. The roles of victim and aggressor are not always as clear as they seem, and perhaps that is exactly why we remain fascinated by such stories, because deep down, Lima Syndrome is not just about kidnappers and hostages, but about the eternal battle between empathy and violence that lives within all of us. Did you enjoy the content? Leave your like, comment, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more mind fragments, where we reveal what many prefer to ignore.